God's prophets in general history. Aristotle's relationship with Alexander the Great is that of a teacher and a student who will open for him the closed doors of science, particularly the history of science. According to Plutarch's text, he referred to Aristotle revised the Iliad of the casket. People do not know that the Iliad, which is attributed to Homer, is the first source of the Torah, as stated by the Jewish historian Josephus in his book, and I will expand on this later. From a historical perspective, this copy is considered a treasure text of Plutarch's book The Historian, and since Philip saw that his son's nature was unyielding and that he resisted compulsion, but was easily led by reasoning into the path of duty, he himself tried to persuade rather than to command him, and because he would not wholly entrust the direction and training of the boy to the ordinary teachers of poetry and the formal studies, feeling that it was a matter of too great importance, and, in the words of Sophocles, a task for many bits and rudder sweeps as well, he sent for the most famous and learned of philosophers, Aristotle, and paid him a noble and appropriate tuition fee. The city of Stagira, that is, of which Aristotle was a native, and which he had himself destroyed, he peopled again, and restored to it those of its citizens who were in exile or slavery. Well, then, as a place where master and pupil could labor and study, he assigned them the precinct of the nymphs near Mysa, where to this day the visitor is shown the stone seats and shady walks of Aristotle. It would appear, moreover, that Alexander not only received from his master his ethical and political doctrines, but also participated in those secret and more profound teachings which philosophers designate by the special terms achromatic and apoptic, and do not impart to many. For after he had already crossed into Asia, and when he learned that certain treatises on these recondite matters had been published in books by Aristotle, he wrote him a letter on behalf of philosophy, and put it in plain language. And this is a copy of the letter. Alexander, to Aristotle, greeting. Thou hast not done well to publish thy achromatic doctrines, for in what shall I surpass other men if those doctrines wherein I have been trained are to be all men's common property? But I had rather excel in my acquaintance with the best things than in my power. Farewell. Accordingly, in defending himself, Aristotle encourages this ambition of Alexander by saying that the doctrines of which he spoke were both published and not published. For in truth his treatise on metaphysics is of no use for those who would either teach or learn the science, but is written as a memorandum for those already trained therein. Moreover, in my opinion, Alexander's love of the art of healing was inculcated in him by Aristotle preeminently. For he was not only fond of the theory of medicine, but actually came to the aid of his friends when they were sick, and prescribed for them certain treatments and regimens, as one can gather from his letters. He was also by nature a lover of learning and a lover of reading. And since he thought and called the Iliad a viaticum of military art, he took with him Aristotle's recension of the poem, called the Iliad of the casket, and always kept it lying with his dagger under his pillow, as Onesicritus informs us. And when he could find no other books in the interior of Asia, he ordered Harpalus to send him some. So Harpalus sent him the books of Philistus, a great many of the tragedies of Euripides, Sophocles, and Aeschylus, and the dithyrambic poems of Telestus and Philoxenus. Aristotle, he admired at the first, and loved him, as he himself used to say, more than he did his father, for that the one had given him life, but the other had taught him a noble life. Later, however, he held him in more or less of suspicion, not to the extent of doing him any harm, but his kindly attentions lacked their former ardors and affection towards him, and this was proof of estrangement. The science of metaphysics, based on Aristotle, was an external science unrelated to the sciences of the earth, according to Plutarch. This science will be used by Aristotle in dealing with the external force that will build the pyramids, and this is clear implementation, which departs from the science of the earth at that time. Aristotle accompanied Alexander on his military journey. But he settled in Egypt and did not leave until the body of Alexander the Great came from Babylon, Iraq. The death of the Prophet Solomon in the Qur'an. The Qur'an relates that Solomon died while he was leaning upon his staff end. That he remained standing, propped up by it, until a little creature, ant or worm, gnawed at it, until, finally, it gave way, and only then did his body collapse. In this way, Solomon spent a long period of time without anyone knowing that he was dead. The question that imposes itself here is where the people are who were with Solomon, and how did he spend a long period of time without two healthy bodies rotting? The Qur'an did not talk about humans and the death of Solomon, but only about the jinn. What did the jinn say when they learned of Sulayman's death? Surah Sheba, then when we decreed death upon him. Nothing indicated to them of his death except an animal of the earth devouring his offspring. And when he fell down, it became clear to the jinn that if they only knew the unseen, what is within, stay in humiliating torment. It is clear from Solomon's death that the jinn were doing hard construction work, and as soon as they learned of his death, they stopped working. Death of Alexander the Great. Body preservation. One ancient account reports that the planning and construction of an appropriate funerary cart to convey the body out from Babylon took 2 years from the time of Alexander's death. It is not known exactly how the body was preserved for about 2 years before it was moved from Babylon. While Plutarch reported treatment by Egyptian embalmers. Egyptian and Chaldean embalmers are said to have attested to Alexander's lifelike appearance. This was interpreted as a complication of typhoid fever, known as ascending paralysis, which causes a person to appear dead prior to death. So, the embalming of the body of Alexander the Great and its stay for 2 years explains the death of Solomon in the Qur'an. So what is the reason for Ptolemy's insistence on transporting Alexander's body to the city of Memphis, now Giza, and burying him there when the construction of the city of Alexandria was completed? Ptolemy I was called the Savior, without knowing what Ptolemy I, king of Egypt, saved, and why Alexander the Great was not buried in his native Macedonia. The most likely answer is that Alexander the Great was buried in the Great Pyramid. Arrian on Alexander's death. Arrian wrote, such is the account given in the royal diary. In addition to this, it states that the soldiers were very desirous of seeing him, some, in order to see him once more while still alive. Others, because there was a report that he was already dead. Imagine that his death was being concealed by the confidential bodyguards, as I for my part suppose. Most of them, through grief and affection for their king, forced their way in to see him. It is said that when his soldiers passed by him he was unable to speak. Yet he greeted each of them with his right hand, raising his head with difficulty and making a sign with his eyes. The royal diary also says that Pethan, Attalus, Demophon, and Pusestas, as well as Cleomenes, Menidas, and Seleucus, slept in the temple of Serapis, and asked the god whether it would be better and more desirable for Alexander to be carried into his temple, in order as a suppliant to be cured by him. A voice issued from the god saying that he was not to be carried into the temple, but that it would be better for him to remain where he was. This answer was reported by the companions, and soon after Alexander died. As if forsooth this were now the better thing. Neither Aristobulus nor Ptolemy has given an account differing much from the preceding. Some authors, however, have related that his companions asked him to whom he left his kingdom, and that he replied, to the best. Others say that in addition to this remark, he told them that he saw there would be a great funeral contest held in his honor. The reason for the delay in the burial of Alexander the Great was the jinn in order for them to finish the construction work. In Egypt, there are works that stopped working due to an unknown reason, including the Serapeum Temple in Saqqara, Egypt. The Sphinx is a symbol of Alexander the Great. In 338 BC, the Macedonians defeated Greek Thebes at Kyrenia in central Greece, led by Philip of Macedon and his son Alexander, and conquered their country. On the battlefield, they erected an impressive statue of a proud lion. The same lion statue was also found in the Macedonian city of Amphipolis. There is still more to talk about Hesham Taher.